This week on NWP. And welcome to Nerds Without Pants, episode 64. I am Julian, and I'm joined as always by Patrick.
What's going on?
And with a really big, energetic intro, we have Angelo.
Hi.
Oh, God damn it. I was hoping, I had my fingers crossed. Nope. And as you figured from the intro, this episode is going to be all about Nintendo 64, because it's the 64th episode, and I am that damn lazy. I was like, hey, 64 episodes, why not do something about the Nintendo 64? That's a topic right there. That's something that we can do for an hour or two.
64 bits worth. That's
right. Two Jaguars duct taped together? No.
Jaguar.
Oh, yes. But no, we're not going to do Consumption Junction this week. I thought that the 64 was a big enough topic to cover. And also the show's been getting a little beefy lately, so try to keep things respectable this time. And also, because we're probably going to do this for the 20th anniversary of the PlayStation, and I don't want to show favoritism, never say that Julian Titus didn't show some love to the Nintendo. Okay? I'm telling you that right now. But I thought we'd kind of start with the lead up to this Nintendo system, because this was back when I was really following stuff, like, super close, and the wait for the Nintendo 64 felt like the most agonizing thing of my life.
We should specify, this was all in print. This wasn't...
Oh, yeah.
We weren't in the internet age yet, kids. So yeah. Go on.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is back when, I had a subscription to Nintendo Power, and I would... By this point, I think I had allowance... But I could also usually convince my mom to buy a new video game magazine for me when we went to the supermarket. So around this time, I'm getting Nintendo Power, every issue of EGM on the newsstand, pretty much every issue of Die Hard Game Fan, and then the occasional Game Pro issue if it had like a new screenshot of Mario 64 in it or something. Because that's what you would do back then. It's like, oh, this magazine has like 2 new screens of Zelda 64, which is what we called it back then, and it's what I still call it now. You would get super excited about that, and they'd be polybagged, so unless you were a dick, you just buy it and take it home. Like, that's what I would do. I think, Angela, you and I might be on the same page here. Patrick, you were a little younger, but, I remember, like, even back when it was announced as Project Reality, I remember seeing in EGM, like, the little demos of, like, that morphing, like, raptor head that they did, and, like, the first little screens of, like, Robotech Crystal Dreams, which never came out. Or, there was that one really weird, almost looked like a punk version of Rayman. It was, like, this 3D action platform that never came out. It was, like, something Radical Kid or something, like, some weird name. And it was, like, this elemental character, and he didn't have, like, limbs. He had, like, disembodied hands. And I think maybe disembodied legs, but it never came out, stuff like that. But, every little bit was just something that I would just drool over, like, incessantly. And,
I remember a little bit. It was like the first time I was coherent when there was a new console being released. So at first, like, one of my friends who I didn't trust that much and would lie to me sometimes said, like, oh, like, this thing Dolphin was coming out or something like that. Was that the one that was codenamed Dolphin?
No, Dolphin was the GameCube. This one was Project Reality.
Oh, I thought... Well, anyway. Well, he said that it was coming out, and I was like, no, just basically what we have is what we're going to have. And, there's going to be Super Nintendo, and there's going to be Sega, and that's it for all time. I don't believe you. And then, like, we were in the library, and he showed me an issue of Nintendo Power. He was like, see, it's like a project or something. Like, so he showed me.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because, for a long time there, or for a while there, it always seemed like there were a lot of kids who were like, well, no, this is it. Like, my Nintendo is all, this is all we're ever going to have, or the Super Nintendo, this is the pinnacle. And I think that went away, like, around the 64 and PlayStation era, where people were like, oh, no, so, like, every 5 years or so, there's something new that comes out. And then I think it's only been, like, now where, because the 360 and PS3 were around so freaking long, that there's a whole generation of gamers who are like, wait, why is there a new machine out? Because we've always had a PlayStation 3.
Yeah, now
I don't know. I think if they follow the scene now because of how easy it is to access information, they've been hearing about, there's going to be new consoles for years before they were even talked about. It's about time for another console generation, like 3 years before they started even announcing like the new Xbox and the new PS4.
Well, sure, but
I think the difference too is that PC is keeping up and advancing in a way beyond what it was before. When it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you got to think that there's like a lot of kids who like they had a 360 when they were like 3 or 4, and they may play a lot of video games, but they might not necessarily follow everything really closely. So they're like, wait, what's a PlayStation 4?
Right.
Like there was definitely, I wrote an article about that, about, hey, look, this is what happens when a new generation comes out. Be prepared. But
my kids were kind of like that. But Patrick, go.
But the reason that I think we didn't get a new console generation so quickly is because the firmware was able to be updated and the graphics got gradually better with that. And then there was a point where they just needed better processors and stuff in the machine itself. So like the actual upgraded, which probably should have been upgraded years before, but state drives to make things load faster if they couldn't handle it. Otherwise, we just coped with things like not having 4-player split screen multiplayer and a lot of first-person shooters and stuff like that. And in exchange, got a little bit better graphics because of the lack of weight on the processor. But then the new console comes out, and then people are like, oh, why do I have to buy a new one? But before, it was a lot shorter of a cycle. And in the end, it's like, what are we waiting for? We're mostly like the next big breakthrough that a scientist or a physicist or computer mechanic or whoever it is makes, and who knows when the next generation will actually have to come.
Right. But let's go back to that generation, because you're right. Like back, especially back then, the leaps between consoles were so much greater because there was more room to grow. So like with the PlayStation and Saturn and Nintendo 64, like that was the huge transition from 2D to 3D polygons. And, again, just looking at like all those screenshots, like those first screens of like Metal Mario, just blew my mind with him like looking all reflective and shiny and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then of course like seeing the controller for the first time. And I'm...
What is this thing?
Yeah, I remember... That was actually the first time that I remember, like, seeing Miyamoto as, like, a person. Like, this is the dude. I think I had read interviews with him in the past in, like, Nintendo Power and EGM and stuff like that, but it didn't click, like, who he was. But here was like, no, this is the guy who made Mario and Zelda, and he's also the guy who was behind this controller, this weird Batarang thing that he's holding up at this, E3. It's like, what is that? Like... How are you even going to use it? It's got three prongs. What are you going to do? What's that thing in the middle? That's what she said. Yeah. But, and I'm definitely a proponent of the Ultra 64. I think that the name was cooler. I think that the color scheme was better. I still wish that Nintendo had released a Nintendo 64 controller in the Ultra 64 colors, because it was like that black controller with the Super Nintendo color buttons. It was like the like dark purple and light purple and gray. And I just thought it looked so much better. That logo was killer. The Nintendo 64 logo, I've never liked it. It's too cartoony. And it's too similar to the Sony logo, the PlayStation logo, come to think of it. Like same color scheme.
It took me a long time to shake Ultra from 64. Like, that just stuck with me for forever. it still sneaks out from time to time, kind of like the same way Zelda 64 is Zelda,
right?
Ocarina of Time, you know.
I mean, it's so much a result of reading all those magazines, right? Because like I was reading a ton of Game Fan at the time, so like their abbreviation would be like NU64, and so it'd be like, oh, Zelda 64 to be announced for NU64, and it's like, yeah, it's Nintendo Ultra 64, damn it, and it's Zelda 64 because everything was 64 initially, and then it turned out that a lot of games ended up being called so and so 64, but I've never been comfortable calling it Ocarina of Time. The only reason that I do it now is to, understand that that's the one I'm talking about and not like Wind Waker or something like that. But yeah, I mean, and the thing is, this is also like the first time that I remembered like something getting delayed, because there was like I think
did it get delayed?
It was like at least a year. It might have been longer.
It felt longer than that because it felt like I was expecting it to come out before the PlayStation. Then I feel like PlayStation was out for a while before the 64 came out. Now this is me as a kid projecting time,
right? Which is
longer. It goes by much slower as a kid than it does an adult. So I'm not 100% sure about that one, but that's how it was perceived by little AJ, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
so Angelo, when you were like that kid, did you get it like right away, or did you treat your consoles the same way you do now, where you wait a little while?
Who, me? I didn't get it. I didn't get an Ultra. There it is. I didn't get a Nintendo 64. I got a PlayStation. Because somebody brought over Final Fantasy VII, and I was like, "This, forget it. I want this." Nothing else matters.
We'll definitely get to that. Well, no, but I mean, for me, Patrick, to answer your question, this was the first system that I bought at launch, and it was funny because. Again, I just wanted it so badly. Like, I had never wanted anything this much in my life. Like, the only thing that even came close was, like, Optimus Prime when I was, like, 6. Like, and my parents couldn't afford Optimus Prime for me. So, like, this was, like, the only thing that I ever wanted more than that. And it was, like, every little delay was excruciating. And I couldn't absorb enough information on it, like, month after month, in every magazine that I could get my hands on. And it was, and I was a sophomore, I remember, in high school, and my friend Devin he was like as into it as I was, and we would like pass each other in the hallways and just say, Mario 64 rules. That was like our little like bread and butter thing, like every time we would see each other, Mario 64 rules. And we hadn't even played it yet, it was just like we could tell, like, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. And of course,
right.
Yeah, and then like, the Toys R Us, got the Nintendo 64 kiosk, and it had Mario 64. I must have gone there like at least 5 times, which was a lot, getting my parents to drive me out to Toys R Us just to go try a demo of a game. But just getting your hands on that analog stick for the first time and everything just working so perfectly. Because I was like, how is this going to work? Like, Mario's never done this before. I don't understand. And even the Nintendo Power that had like the first maps, like everything was in, because I mean, you gotta remember Nintendo Power like strategies, where it was all of the screenshots pasted together on a page, and here was like an actual hand-drawn 3-dimensional map to show you that at the top of this mountain is this big Bob-omb that you have to fight, and it's like, what? How do you? I couldn't even like wrap my head around the concept. It was so foreign, like. Mm-hmm. I wanted it so badly, and it's funny because pre-orders weren't a thing back then yet.
No.
But the Best Buy, our one Best Buy at the time, they broke Street Date on the system and the games by a week. Like, my friend Devin, he called me, he's like, dude, like, Best Buy has Nintendo 64, they're selling right now. And we immediately went down there, and it was gone, but I was able to get Mario 64 and Pilot Wings. And then I poured over that instruction manual for like a whole week, just like, full color manual, like, all the drawings of Mario and all the different moves he could do. And I was like, how can he do all this stuff? Like, there's no way that you can do all this stuff in a video game. It's just impossible.
I remember that. One thing I remember about that too is they didn't go into detail on how you can chain them together. And the first time I saw somebody do that, it just like blew my mind. Like, wait, you can do that move and then connect it to that move, and it was just like, just all of a sudden all these possibilities appeared, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can even process this.
Like do the triple jump and then do that into the dive and then slide. Yep. So amazing.
Stuff like that.
Oh, and then backflip out of the slide because you're crouching already.
Well, there was like a move. There was like recovery moves. Like if you were going off a cliff, you could like backflip and then do. I saw him do it, and I don't even know if I could do it if he handed me a controller. But it was just like you could chain stuff together and pull off some real weird stuff.
Right.
And it would work.
And we talked about that a little bit with like the speedrun stuff last time.
Yep.
But and Patrick, we started the show with it, but it's like you've said before, like you were the Nintendo 64 kid. That was you, but you didn't get it at launch, did you? That was a Christmas.
Yeah, I was depressed for like 3 months after it came out because it came out like right around my birthday, I think. September.
It was September-ish, yeah.
Yeah, mine's early September. I think it came out later September, and I was like, why can't I have a system? Because my Sega Genesis broke, so I just didn't have anything for, 6 months or something like that. And like my parents were like, well, we're sorry. I just don't think we can ever get a new console. Like we don't have that kind of money to ever like buy something like that. And they downplayed it for months, and then Santa came. And I went nuts. Like I was so nuts that I jumped in the air with the box and threw myself on the ground first just to make sure that it wasn't going to get damaged at all. And I was rubbing it and all that,
Oh, no.
And, yeah, it's all on video. It's crazy. I haven't even watched it in a long time, but, like, I think my dad sold the video to that N64 kid, and just, like, they pasted a new hat on because it's, like, the same almost. I might have even gone more overboard than him. You know how I do.
Right.
I'm sort of glad at Christmas. I'm sure for you had, like, 2 games. Or Mario 64 and Pilot Wings were the only things that came out at launch.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it was funny because I also only bought one game in the year the first year that I had it. I bought Doom 64, and that was it. And I actually ended up trading in my 64 like about a year, maybe a little year and a half after it came out, because that's when I discovered Game Fellas, and I was like, man, there is nothing coming out for this system. Like that was my first experience with the whole like, post-launch, nothing is there. But, also the 64, I mean, again, yeah, 2 games at launch. And I didn't even end up liking Pilot Wings. So for me, what happened was, I got my dad to pick it up for me that Sunday that it came out, fired up Mario 64 and played it for hours. Then I popped in Pilot Wings and played it for like half an hour. And then beat Mario 64 in less than a week. And I was like, well, now what? I was like, I guess I'm back on my PlayStation because, I wasn't going to replay Mario 64 that soon because I'd just gotten all 120 stars. And
like visualizing Pilot Wings and how slow that game was makes me think of how you felt after you beat Mario. So it's only appropriate to play Pilot Wings next because like just gliding in the air really slowly and like looking at like the landing space ahead, like all these new games, all these new rings you can go through. But they're just so far away because you're going so slow in this glider.
Right. And then the thing was like, I was still renting a lot of games back then. So like I rented Mario 64 and I was like, this isn't nearly as good as Super Mario Kart. And like, and just other stuff. And the other thing was like the games were so expensive. We're talking, $64.99 minimum, but there were definitely times when you could easily find like a 64 game for $80. And that was not doable for me, working at a supermarket. So I'd be very choosy, which is why I ended up only getting Doom 64, which I will say is one of my favorite editions of Doom. But yeah. I had to be very selective in what I picked up, and there also just wasn't a lot that came out that first year or year and a half that I even was really interested in. And I guess that kind of speaks to maybe my feelings on the 64 as a whole. Looking back on it is like, I was so excited for it, and, Mario 64 was amazing, and then, Zelda came out, and that's when I rebought a 64, and I played that up until the Water Temple, and it was so amazing up until the Water Temple.
I feel like I've heard that a few times.
Oh, man, that Water Temple, guys.
Not even just from you.
Like
What's that, Patrick?
Something about putting boots on and off, I don't know.
Oh, it wasn't even just that. It was like there was
the layout of the dungeon.
Yeah, there's just so much to it. It's like 3 times longer than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I kind of look back at the 64, and even at the time, and I think that maybe, you know, for me, this was like the first, well, I'd say the first example of like Nintendo like kind of falling behind the times, but when I think back, like really there was only one time that Nintendo was ahead of the curve, and that was the Super Nintendo. That was the only system that they ever released that was like, you know, significantly better than what everything else on the market, like power-wise. You think that Nintendo was like inferior as far as like specs go to the Master System. It's just they had a better library. The Game Boy was like kind of laughable when you compared it to the Lynx and the Game Gear. It's just, again, they had a library.
And it didn't destroy batteries just by looking at them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say they had battery life, too.
Yeah. You know, and I mean, that was all by design. So, but then the Super Nintendo came out and it was like, no, this is, you know, I will fight you Sega fanboys to my dying breath. Like, there are some good games, and there's some great games on the Genesis, but don't come and talk to me about that system, you know, being on par with the Super Nintendo. It's just, no. Like, no. Sorry, Patrick.
I'm with Julian on this one. Here's the other thing, too, though. When the Nintendo 64 came out, there was a generation split between systems, the likes of which we had never seen before. Like, up until that point, you had 8-bit systems that were all kind of comparable to each other, and then 16-bit systems that were all sort of comparable to each other. But now you've got Sony on one side with their radically different system from Nintendo's. And then Sega was off doing its own thing, who knows what. You know?
They didn't know.
I don't even think they knew. But this is the first time things just went, like, all over the place.
Yeah, and it was also weird too because, you know, up until that point it was always like comparing the numbers, right? Like 16-bit is better than 8-bit and 32-bit is better than 16-bit, but then you had the Nintendo 64 and you had the Sony PlayStation, which, you know, just going by the numbers, the 64 was supposed to be twice as good, but then you would look at the games and at least to my mind, the PlayStation was like far superior, but there was the whole CD-ROM versus cartridge thing going on that took a while for me to really grasp.
Yeah, and it does have, there are some games that will play better on the Nintendo system. For example, there was a Tetris game that came out on the Nintendo 64, right? And I'd rather play a game like that on the 64 because you don't have loading times, you know, and you don't want loading between different rounds of a puzzle game. Mm-hmm. So kind of for like those quick style, I don't want to just use falling blocks as the only example, but anything that like doesn't have a lot of that, you're going to load a lot of stuff here, there, and everywhere, and it's not like some sort of an epic. Like my epics belonged on the PlayStation. That's where Final Fantasy VII belonged. It did not belong on the Nintendo 64.
Like maybe a racing game. I don't know. Does it belong on 64 more because you just make all of the level load at one time and that's that.
Right. Yeah, I mean you can get into a game of Mario Kart like lickety split, you know, like.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I don't know, like you say that, Angelo, but I still go back and look at that Final Fantasy VI tech demo that they did on the Nintendo 64 hardware, and even now, like I think that like art style wise, that's probably more what I would have wanted from Final Fantasy VII than what we ended up getting, because I felt that it was more true to, you know, what we'd seen before.
But Square back then. Square has always been a show-off company. Well, they've always been like, we are going to push this stuff to the limit. This is going to be the biggest, baddest, most epic, and greatest sounding game, RPG anyway, that you've ever played. And they between the two, they had to go with Sony.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it was Final Fantasy VII where they became that, because I think even Final Fantasy VI, as impressive as it was, like that was still, I mean, it was definitely pushing the Super Nintendo, but it wasn't like, oh my God, look at this amazing technical achievement, where Final Fantasy VII was definitely that. And you're right, I mean, there's no way they could have done that on the 64.
Dude, your Super Nintendo sang to you.
This is true.
I mean, no other game did that. Oh, except for
Clay Fighter.
Wait. Well, yeah, Clay Fighter and Tales of Fantasia, which didn't come out here on Super Nintendo. But that actually had the title screen music actually had vocals running, which was amazing.
You haven't heard the Clay Fighter theme song, Patrick?
Oh.
Clay Fighter, Clay
Fighter is a 63 and a third. I still say Triple Brown Betty combo.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
People are fighting all of a sudden. I'll say it. I don't know why that stuck out of all things, and I don't know what character even said it, but yeah, they said annoying catchphrases that still stick in my brain.
There were a lot of those in that game.
And I didn't play Clay Fighter on 64, but I think I remember that because of people trying it in the store, because I do remember that Triple Brown Betty combo thing.
Yeah, I never played anything that the Super Nintendo one was the only one I played for that.
It's really all that ever should have existed.
And even then, barely.
Although that Blockbuster sculpted edition of Clay Fighter is one of the rarer N64 games, especially if you can find one that's in decent condition, because, you know, Blockbuster had so much, like, graffiti that they would put on the cartridges for rental purposes. Mm-hmm. So if you can find a nice one, you know, it's going to set you back. Angelo, so you didn't really talk about how did you end up being exposed to the system for the first time?
Just people had it. Like my cousins had it. My younger cousins, like much younger, they had that. They had Mario 64 and they had Mario Kart. And I remember playing Mario Kart a little bit over at their house and being like, I don't like this.
Right? There's something about Mario Kart 64 that doesn't do it for me.
It doesn't feel right, and I don't know how else to explain it to you. And what's weird is, essentially, okay, my favorite Mario Kart is the one for the DS. That's my favorite Mario Kart, my favorite version of Mario Kart. And the odd thing is it is essentially a very similar game on very similar, statistically similar hardware. You know, I think the DS was marginally less powerful than the Nintendo 64, right? So somehow I ended up loving Mario Kart DS and not liking Mario Kart 64. GoldenEye, on the other hand, I played quite a bit of GoldenEye. I was not very good at GoldenEye, at least not multiplayer, but when I was at college, people had Nintendo 64s and GoldenEye, and we used to play a lot of that. So that wasn't, for some reason, I could never wrap my head around GoldenEye, but I could just destroy people in Counter-Strike, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's mouse and keyboard, maybe it's the map designs just didn't click with me as well, but I don't know.
So the GoldenEye thing went completely over my head. I rented GoldenEye, and I was like, this is a pretty cool game. Like, I liked the fact that you could actually, like, target different body parts. You know, like, if you did a headshot, it actually mattered. Or, you know, if you hit somebody in the leg, they would go down. I thought that was really cool. And, you know, the level design seemed all right. I rented it. I played it for 3 days. I turned it in, and I was like, that was all right. And then, you know, a few months later, I'm working at Game Fellas for, you know, this is like Christmas season of 1997. Everybody is searching for GoldenEye. Nobody can find it. It is the hottest thing that people want for Christmas season. And, like, customers would be like, well, they'd be like, what? Why do kids want this so badly? And I was like, to be honest, I don't really know. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was, like, fantastic, but I didn't understand the multiplayer.
I was just going to say that. You don't understand multiplayer.
I never played it multiplayer. I didn't even have a second controller for my N64. So, like, it wasn't even a thing for me. Like, I didn't play multiplayer GoldenEye until, like, 2 years later at a party. And I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get this. But then, of course, they were so much better than me because they've been playing it for years, and it was my first time. But, yeah, I was like, okay, like, I don't know why this game is the thing this year. And we were selling it for, like, $80 because our cost was, like, basically full retail price. So we were making, like, very, very small profit margins on it. We were just trying to keep it in stock. It was crazy.
I don't even think I ever owned it, but I rented it so many times I was able to beat it in the 5 days that you would rent it. And sometimes, like, set some records and things so I could get, like, bonus abilities, like you could get paintball mode and things like that. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things about the single player was that there was always, like, a time you had to beat it in or objectives you had to complete in order for you to get a new special secret, like big head mode, stuff like that. It was probably the first game I played where I was heavily unlocking things. But for the multiplayer part, even though I didn't have it most of the time when my friends would come over, they would bring GoldenEye because they wanted to play it so much, and I was still like on par with them, or if not better, because I just played too many video games since I was an only child and stuff. In the middle of reading or writing or whatever. But yeah, as a kid I did that too.
I would hope so.
I guess the combination of the single and multiplayer made it an all-around package for me.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned like the challenge modes and stuff like that, because that was like the first game that I remember that actually had like secondary objectives that weren't part of beating the level. But if you did, if you beat it in this time, you would get this, or if you did this specific thing, you would get that. And and it was like the first time that I was like, I'm not good enough to do this stuff. Like I was able to do a few of them, but some of those times it was like there is no way that any human being can do this.
The experiences that I've had with the Nintendo 64, one thing that I'll say that it did better than any other console at the time, or than anything really that I had experienced up to that point, was it just made you have to think in 3D. So if you think about, for example, the PC games I was playing up until then, with the exception of Descent, which I never fully wrapped my head around. And you guys haven't played, like Doom is really, and somebody can explain this on a more technical level than I can, Doom really is a 2D game. Mm-hmm. It just gives you the illusion of it being 3D. But it doesn't, and it never requires you to think in 3D. None of the games I had played up until I had played any games on the Nintendo 64 required me to think in that method. And even then, the games that were coming out on PlayStation, 3D was more of a gimmick than an actual game concept. So, like, think of the platformers that they had. They had, like, Crash Bandicoot. Jumping Flash was kind of 3D, except it had paths that you would follow, so it wasn't really like, here's just an open thing for you to explore, like I think Mario 64 was, or even Zelda to an extent. It was more directed. That's my opinion on it.
I mean, I feel that, like, the cool thing about Jumping Flash was the verticality. But the levels were really small. But no, like Mario 64 created an entire genre. It's like the 3D platformer. Like that didn't exist until that game.
Nothing made you actually have to think in 3D concepts, like Zelda 64. I'll use your term for you, and Mario 64 did. Anywhere else, I don't think. Like the games that they had on PlayStation, I keep comparing it to Final Fantasy VII, but I didn't play anything like that there. Patrick probably has an opportunity to tell me I'm wrong.
No, but it does remind me of my first underrated gem on the N64, which not only combines the replayability of areas like that Zelda has with the platforming elements of Mario 64, but it also has a good soundtrack and unlockable sections to levels that you have to backtrack to. We've talked about this a lot when JD was on one of the podcasts, but Jet Force Gemini.
You're to say that.
Yeah. And let's see. It also has a little bit more than just that. It was another game that had like collectible items. There were these things called tribals, and they look like little Ewoks, but you could kill them with friendly fire, something that you didn't see much of, and you'd have to redo the level if you killed them because you had to get all of the tribals in order to unlock the full ending. Like, it was crazy. I've never had like a game like that, and it was one of the more difficult games, which is why I was never even able to see the full ending, but why I would play a remaster of it. Nintendo.
Oh, they wouldn't be able to because I think it's owned by Rare, or it'd be owned by Microsoft at this point, technically.
Yeah. And I mean, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie kind of did that as well, but I think that Jet Force Gemini incorporated more platforming elements. Maybe I'm wrong, but...
I didn't really play much of it. I mean, I had problems with the Rare Nintendo 64 games. Like, I thought they were gorgeous. I liked the character designs. I liked the worlds. It was just too much in all of those games, you know. Like, I remember, I think somebody said that you would have to play every level of Donkey Kong 64 like 5 times through to get everything, and I was like, no, I am not doing that.
That sounds terrible.
Right. I mean, you know, but again, you know, if you're like 9 and you've got one game and it's Banjo-Kazooie, you're going to be like really thankful that there's like a bajillion widgets that you have to collect because, you know, what else are you going to do?
And I think, like, you could argue Mario 64 did that with making you have to revisit levels, but it didn't do it in a way that makes me cringe like the Rare games did. Like, we've talked about my kind of, I don't hate the Banjo games, but I don't really like them. We've talked about that before. Like, the collect-a-thon nature of it seems...
Yeah.
It's too much. Like, even though Mario 64 is literally all about collecting stars, somehow it doesn't feel as abrasive to me as the Banjo games do.
Maybe because that's the only thing that you're actually collecting in Mario 64. I mean, at one point you're getting coins in order to get a star, but...
Right. And maybe it's because when you go into a world in Mario 64, it's like, okay, I'm going in the world with the objective of getting this one particular star, here's how you do it, and then you're done. Whereas with the Banjo games, it's like you're running around, you're getting 5 of these, and then, I got distracted and grabbed some of these, but I have to get 30 more of these, and it's just like, what?
I never played too much of the Banjo games, like except at friends' houses. But what I did have was Donkey Kong 64, which was also a collect-a-thon. Mm-hmm. And it was like the only game that I ever really felt like I was collecting too much of something, and they were all bananas. I couldn't even finish it, even though I got like 2 games a year at that point. Just because it was like I'm doing the same thing over and over again with like a new character. Like that was the first time I ever felt like burnt out by a game. Maybe.
Yeah. No, totally. Like I mean, I didn't even end up picking up Donkey Kong 64 because I just, you know, I was reading the reviews and everything. It just sounded like the longest game ever. And I think it was right after. So I bought Turok 2, you know, when the expansion pack came out, and I thought Turok 2 was awesome. I loved the weapons. I loved the level design. I thought it was really cool. But
the fog.
No, with the expansion pack, the fog wasn't that bad.
Oh, okay.
Without the expansion pack, ooh. But
that must have been the version I saw then.
Yeah.
Because I remember, the fog game, yeah.
but there was a day, and I remember it very vividly. I had to be somewhere. I had to go to work. I was like playing before work. I had played that game for over an hour and had not found the next save point. And I had lost all of my progress because I was like, well, I've got to go to work. Like, if I don't leave now, I'm going to be late. And I wasn't going to leave my Nintendo 64 on all day. So I had to shut it off. And it's like, well, there's an hour plus of progress just gone. And I never went back to it. I was like, that is ridiculous. And it's not that I had missed a save point, mind you. It's just that there was so much space between that checkpoint and the next one, because the game was just too big. And hearing that about Donkey Kong 64, I was like, no, that's all right.
There were a lot of games like that back in the day because they didn't have the same quality assurance that they do now. I'm thinking of Final Fantasy VIII had a section with, I believe, a spiral type of dungeon or like a building you had to go up, and there were a bunch of different floors. And it took like an hour and a half between save points. Maybe I missed one, maybe not. But I remember getting yelled at by my dad to like turn off the damn console. And I was like, I can't. I will lose everything. You don't understand. From when I started to now, I have not saved.
I can't just write this password down, Dad.
Yeah, he's like, he probably was saying that. I'm like, passwords aren't a thing anymore. That was Mega Man.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I can compare it to is if anybody played Munch's Odyssey on the original Xbox.
Little bit at the store. I tried it out.
That's
how I feel about all those games. like the Banjo, the Donkey Kong 64, the Banjo, whatever Hui, whichever one it is. I remember playing that over at a friend's house and going, oh, this is neat. And then after I played it for about 2 hours, I'm like, all I'm doing is picking up piles of crap off the ground. Literally, that's the game.
Right.
Like, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, he's running around picking up piles of crap off the ground. And it's just like, this isn't fun. So, that was it.
You know what was fun, and thinking of the expansion pack, because I really do feel the expansion pack added so much to that console. Any love for Star Wars Rogue Squadron here?
I never played it.
I
didn't know anybody with an expansion pack, I don't think.
The Battle of Naboo, like they all seemed like they had the same kind of levels from one of them to another. There was always the Hoth level. I couldn't really distinguish them at the time, at least, but I did like Shadows of the Empire.
That one, for me, that was only that Hoth level. Like, I really didn't like the stuff on foot, but the actual, like, snow speeder level was amazing. And then, so for me, Rogue Squadron was like, oh, it's like that, but way more of it, and you also have X-Wings and A-Wings and B-Wings and, and the fact that, like, they hid the Naboo fighter in there for, like, I think it was, like, almost 2 years between when that game came out and when the, like, Easter egg came out that, oh, by the way, like, we programmed the Naboo fighter in here before, like, the movie even came out, and you didn't know until now. And it's like, holy crap! I think, they had access to the movie production stuff, and they were just like, well, we're just going to hide this really, really well. Because I think Episode 1 was already, like, out of theaters by the time that, magazines were like, oh, hey, by the way, like, put in this code, and you have the Naboo fighter from Episode 1 in Rogue Squadron. It's like,
how did you unlock it?
I think it was a code.
Oh, just a code.
Yeah. But,
there's no data mining back then, I guess.
No, I mean, maybe like the hardest of hardcore hacker geeks.
You had to get special hardware because it was a cart.
Yeah.
It wasn't that simple to do.
Yeah, because you even needed, like, like the special screwdrivers and stuff like that to get into that stuff.
Yeah, like reverse engineering, and that shit's illegal.
Is it?
Well,
they should, if so, then like Rare, like it's founded on illegal activity, because that's what they did when they started on the NES. Yeah, reverse engiringing stuff. It might have been like more recently that happened, but yeah, back then that's how they did their stuff.
I think there's limits on it, but I don't know if the overall practice is illegal so much as, I have no idea.
I just think the whole concept to me is just so cool. It's like, we took this thing that we don't understand, and then we worked it backwards and found out how it works. Like, what? That's amazing.
That is one of my favorite stories about EA doing that.
Copy a BIOS or something like that, is that much part of the root to the computer, but you could like copy the way that memory is made or something like that, probably.
So you can copy the hardware right down to the letter. It's the programming that matters. You can't copy somebody else's programming. So you couldn't, like, say, pull the data off a chip on the console and then just copy and paste that code into, if you're reverse engineering a piece of hardware, into your hardware. Mm-hmm. You would have to figure out how to teach that hardware to do what the other hardware is doing without looking at their data on it. So I think that's the line.
Right.
It's still really cool stuff.
It is really cool stuff. But,
yeah, I would definitely do it.
Yeah.
So, like, I think we've hit. I mean, well, we didn't really, like, Patrick. Holy crap! Like, we didn't even really talk about Zelda 64 except for, like, the crappy water temple. But I mean, wasn't that like a religious moment for you?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's definitely like a watershed moment in my life.
Oh, that pun! I get you.
No pun intended, really. I don't know. But these things just happen subconsciously to me somehow.
It's a gift.
I just was thinking more of the underrated N64 games to highlight, because I feel like I talk way too much about Zelda as it is. And sure, we haven't talked about it in months, just like you haven't talked about a certain massive game in months. But that'll come back with, the next trilogy that's coming out and all that kind of thing. I just more wanted to talk about, games that people would not have known and just thrown away by the wayside and said this system only has 10 good games or something like that.
Right.
So like, I'm thinking more like, you remember this game Body Harvest?
Dude, I loved Body Harvest.
Yeah, I heard about that. I didn't play it, but I heard about it.
Yeah, so recently you guys have been talking about some stuff I couldn't even play because I was a kid, and those like games like Doom and stuff were rated mature, but I did get to play like some underrated stuff like Body Harvest at a friend's house, and that was really cool, I thought, because you could talk to people that were inside of buildings, and there were lots of different vehicles to use. It was just hard to get over the terrible graphics, I thought, but what did you guys think of Body Harvest?
Yeah, I loved it, but you're right. I mean, it looked terrible even back then. But, my elevator pitch for it is time-traveling sci-fi Grand Theft Auto 3. Because you go through all these different, like, time periods, and they have, like, different period-style vehicles, and you can jump into any vehicle that's around, just like Grand Theft Auto. But then you've got this third-person, shooting mechanic to it, and then, like, aliens that you're fighting. But I thought it was a lot of fun. It definitely one of those underrated gems because, I think it was pretty early in the system's lifespan. Because I always feel like it gets mentioned at the same time as Blast Corps, and I don't know if it's because they're both B games or because they're both games that came out like in the first like year and a half. But I always have really fond memories.
To talk about Blast Corps in a little bit, that was another game I really loved. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I mean that was it. Like like I think it always gets lumped in with that one a lot. I just don't get the sense that like a lot of people actually played. I feel that Blast Corps, was a pretty successful game that a lot of people played, which I never really got. I wasn't a big Blast Corps fan, but maybe you can, shine some light on that for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was another game that I played at a friend's house who had like a really large TV, so it made things instantly cooler. Maybe I was a little biased at the time, but it was also like maybe the first time I'd ever played a game with support missions where you like got to escort nuclear bombs through demolishable levels. And like it was really hectic for me at the time. I wasn't able to solve puzzles as quickly being that young, and you had to move TNT around, put it in bigger structures. Just like Body Harvest, there were like lots of vehicles. Maybe that's what I'm thinking is the biggest parallel between them. And you go to multiple planets, but you also unlock stuff like a mission on a pool table, where you have to push TNT, I think, into the side pockets and stuff.
I remember it way differently, but I do remember it being super stressful for me.
Yeah, but like those things, like the different settings that I hadn't seen or played in a place, and destructible environments and more interaction with the escort mission kind of made it just like a unique game for me at the time.
Yeah, I mean it definitely had its charm. I felt that was one of those that I rented and I just didn't feel like it had like legs to support like a purchase, like I couldn't have imagined like buying that game.
Oh yeah, and especially me too. I only got like 2 games a year, so 3 maybe.
Right.
So,
Patrick?
Yeah, so I guess it wasn't that unique to me at the time. I did think people probably liked it more because it was Rare who developed it, and they had a certain kind of polish that everybody just instantly kind of liked. But I did want to move back to Body Harvest for a second because I found it interesting you said that it was like Grand Theft Auto because the guys who made it eventually became Rockstar North.
Oh, was that DMA?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I always think, I remember the Midway logo on it because I think they were the publisher. So I always think of it being a Midway game. But I think, yeah, you're right. It was DMA, DMA Designs. Like, I think doesn't mean anything is what it stood for.
Yeah. That's funny. If that's what it really stands for. They have good names. But that and another one, Space Station Silicon Valley, are pretty similar in the way that, like, they let you inhabit a bunch of different things, but in Space Station Silicon Valley, ship that can inhabit animals instead of in Body Harvest, you go to different worlds and stuff. So I guess I can kind of see how they're related in that, like how Space Station was the next step up from Body Harvest, I guess.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who really loved Space Station Silicon Valley. I never really got into it, but that was a really popular one for us.
I did hear a lot about that game too, just now, like on retro themed shows and whatnot or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, that also came out on PlayStation 1, so I'm surprised you didn't get into it.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I didn't hear about it till after the fact. Like, I just started hearing about it recently. It wasn't something I heard about while PlayStation era was in full swing.
Well, these are the kind of, like, things that I wanted to highlight instead of, like, a Zelda, because we always talk about those big ones that were mammoth games and, like, will have changed our lives, but there were also those little ones that, like, maybe you played for a month at the most, or maybe 5 days as a rental like I did, but they were still, you know, good games, and people who on these forums that I've been reading, searching for, like, different games and researching all the different gameplay elements that come at you with different points that I can make, are all saying, like, there's 10 to 12 good games, and I'm like, no, there's way more than that. It's just that the end of the life cycle of the N64 really tapered off, and so everybody remembers that last year where, like, nothing came out in between the GameCube and N64 when PlayStation 2 was hitting its full stride, and it looked like they were just taking Nintendo out of the water. But
and I think there were also games that were just really well made that I know that when I could get people to play them, they loved them, but they didn't necessarily, like, stand out on the shelves. I mean, one of the biggest ones that comes to mind for me, and every time that I fire up my Nintendo 64, I have to pop it in for a little bit, is Beetle Adventure Racing by EA.
I've heard about that one too.
It's one of my all-time favorite racing games.
I don't even know that one.
Yeah, it's all Volkswagen Beetles. Those are the only cars. The only differences are, like, the colors and the handling, but they all look the same. Like, it had to have been a very cheap game to produce because you have the one car model. But the thing is that the tracks were really well done, and they had all these really cool shortcuts, and they had all this weird stuff, like in the ice level, you could actually, like, jump this ramp in a cave, and you would, like, drive by a UFO that was frozen in the ice. And, like, little quirky things like that. You had, like, all these hidden things that you were trying to find. It was almost like, if I remember correctly, it was almost like finding collectibles, like, kind of like spelling, like, skate in Tony Hawk and stuff like that type of thing. But, just really well handling game. It graphically it looked on par with other 64 stuff, which is to say that it was polygonal and kind of blurry. But really good sense of speed, just a really lot of fun. It probably just didn't go far enough with the crazy, because if you just looked at, like, a screenshot, it just looks like a racing game with Volkswagen Beetles in it. It's like, okay, well, those aren't the sexiest cars to drive around.
Right.
But when you actually like get behind the controller and start playing it, you realize that it's almost like a kart game in a sense, but it's missing, like, the weapons and stuff like that. But just in the way that it handles and, the wacky level design and the shortcuts and stuff like that. So
it probably was that kart game, Mario Kart, that made all the other racing games on that system basically get overshadowed. But there were some other good ones. Like, I'd never played it, but I've heard Scars is really good, and the one that I really liked, even probably, well, maybe I would say more than Mario Kart, is DK Racing. Like, it was faster, they had more upgrades, and from what I can remember, the levels were, like, more vibrant. I'm just thinking nostalgically here, but everything was definitely faster. There were, like, rocket boosters that you had on the back of, like, DK's kart and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, they probably took a lot of the code from Mario Kart because it seems pretty similar in visual aspects of the game, but it seemed like it was on steroids or something.
Yeah, I mean, on that level too, like, I forget the full name, but there was a Hot Wheels game for the 64 that had like a full-on trick system in it, where you could actually, like, if you got enough air, you could do like, flips and twists and turns in the air for extra points and extra boost. And that game is really cool, but that's another one that, like, I mean, it had the Hot Wheels name, but what did that even mean at that point? So
that was the one, like, you got to be a little car. Was there like a level on a pool table also in that game?
No, that was the Micro Machines game I think you're thinking of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That game had some sweet levels though. The Micro Machines one, I liked that.
Yeah, that was one of those little sleeper hits for the PlayStation. Well, and it's on the 64 too, I think.
No, it was on the Super Nintendo.
Well, they also brought it out on the PlayStation and 64.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were a lot of racing games on that. I guess you were right, Angelo, about games where you can load everything at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, games that really, really benefited from low amounts of loading time were great on that. Like, if you remember, they tried to put Resident Evil on the N64, and the cart cost a small fortune. And, I mean, the loading times were reduced and all that stuff, but they kept, like, the opening door animations, which were something that they put in there to disguise the loading times. It was kind of weird. But
but it adds so much tension to the game. Like, you need that in there.
It does. That's fair. Well, that's the whole thing, is the game was designed around loading times. It's the same way that, like Silent Hill is designed around the fog.
Right.
Like, that was a system limitation, but it was something that actually added to the game. So, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Unlike Turok.
Right. Turok was just an embarrassment. I'm sorry.
Really? Even without the fog?
Well, no, Turok 1, I mean, that thing is just a foggy mess. I think
that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Turok 2, like, without or with the expansion pack, is pretty sharp.
Oh, you know what? I did not see Turok 2. I only saw Turok 1, I think.
Oh, man, you didn't have the cerebral bore?
Oh, that sounds awesome as a weapon, actually.
What did it do?
Oh,
what did it do? It's called the cerebral bore.
Yeah, it would. You would fire it, and it would drill into the guy's head, and then, like, after a little bit, it would blow up. So it was almost like a precursor.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of like a precursor to, like, the plasma grenades in Halo, but it was just such a cooler thing where it's like you would hear the beeping and you would know that it was over, but, like, you could still, like, try to get that last shot in before, like, you went up in smoke. But yeah, plus the name. It's just such a cool name.
It sounds like it looks more like the fire bow in Half-Life 2. I don't know. Yeah, just the fact that it would, like, stick in you, like, the arrow would stick in somebody and do some, like, fire damage or something first. Like, it wouldn't explode or anything, or at least I don't think it did. I could be wrong. But I remember now that my friend, when I did sleep over New Year's Eve one year, and I think, like, the first year of high school, did bring out Turok 2 and showed me the cerebral bore as, like, his favorite weapon ever. So, yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw another little one out at you guys that I didn't really play a lot, but I think it was interesting because it might have been a little ahead of its time, which is Hybrid Heaven, which was basically like an action RP. Well, it was like a third-person action game with, like, some stealth and some shooting mechanics, but it was also a role-playing game. Like, you actually leveled up and stuff like that. You had like a quest and stuff like that. And the reason it was called Hybrid Heaven was because they were trying to bring all these different genres together into one package. And this is this is in a time before where, like, I mean, now it's so, like, every game has, like, experience points these days,
right,
and skill trees. But back then it was like a really novel idea. And it came out, like, kind of late in the 64's life. And I checked it out from the store. I didn't play it for a long time. I think maybe 5 or 6 hours, but I thought it had some really interesting ideas, just kind of clunky in the execution. Mm-hmm. But, and I think that was a lot of the 64 library, where a lot of really interesting ideas, but kind of maybe limited by the hardware or the cartridge limitations. But, if you looked hard enough, you could definitely see where, like, there's some really interesting and cool ideas in there.
Oh yeah, I'm looking up the cover, and I definitely remember seeing the cover.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those I skipped over.
It was way better than Quest 64.
Yeah, that's one that I
exist.
actually rented and disliked. Huh.
Wait. I must be thinking of something else. Quest 64 existed?
No, yeah, Quest 64 was like the really first and only quote-unquote RPG on the 64, and it was god-awful.
Okay, that might be why I don't have any recollection of it, even by name.
Even the character design is lame. It's like this little boy wizard with like a cloak and like a cowlick and a staff. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Dragon Quest, honestly.
Oh, that's... No, you take that back, sir.
You don't think the design looks similar?
No. Quest 64 to me looks like the final project of like, you know, some like video game design student that had to cram in 6 weeks to put it together.
I mean, mostly like the main character, like the character in like Dragon Quest 7 or something like that. I don't know.
No, man, because
the levels.
Dragon Quest has Akira Toriyama designs, man. Like, you can't go wrong with Akira Toriyama.
You can, though.
What? No, you can't. I will fight you.
Fanboy fight.
Yeah.
I guess the system, regardless, did have a bunch of good third-person action titles that influenced the next generation. Like one that I've been waiting the entire podcast to talk about, Operation Winback, as it's called in Europe, or just Winback here.
Excellent choice.
It had this hilariously named special covert action team that, if you put it together, makes the acronym SCAT.
Yeah.
They're forced into like a mission where like the leader, the Secretary of Defense, declares war against terrorists. They're the Crying Lions, and they had WMDs, and I don't think I ever thought about weapons of mass destruction before that. So it was a big deal, like, for my mind to get around, just like, oh, you could, you know, demolish the whole world with one bomb or something. And it was also like the first game that I remember having a cover mechanic where you press one of the C buttons or whatever it was, and you got to go down and, you know, shoot when you wanted to, instead of having to kind of put yourself behind a wall or something and move out and back like strafing. You actually got to use the cover. And it made such a big impact on like Metal Gear Solid that the second one I just read had dog tags you could collect on an easy version of the game that gave homage to it. So that's a pretty cool fact. But to end it, there were multiple endings in that game that I never got to because I didn't complete the game fast enough. But I was young. Okay.
I mean, Winback was it was a really cool game just on its own, but, you know, like a lot of people will credit, like Kill Switch on the PS2 for being like the inspiration for the cover mechanics that were put into Gears of War. But yeah, I mean, really, you've got to give it to Winback because you're right. Like, I could be wrong, but I really do feel like that was the first game that had like a true cover-based shooting mechanic. And then Kill Switch had the ability to blind fire. But, you know, I really, when I played Kill Switch, I was like, oh, well, this is kind of like Winback.
Yeah, I don't think we are wrong, because I was wanting to make that point the whole day when I was researching this, and I looked up, like, specifically if there were any other games beforehand. And some games even some places, like, I think Giant Bomb gave this credit as the first game with cover mechanics, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and
this is honestly the first I've heard of this game.
Oh man, they did it was either a sequel or a remake on the PS2, and I know there was a sequel later on. So they're good games. They're worth checking out for sure.
I might do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I could always add more to my backlog. Why not?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And start a show or something while you're at it.
I know. About the trials of going through my backlog. Or
Or maybe just bring the podcast back.
maybe just bring the podcast back. Stop being so lazy. Get it done.
What podcast was that?
Yeah, what podcast was that, Angelo?
Backwalkers Anonymous.
I think they took your chips away.
Yeah, I think so. I'm off the wagon again.
Well, Patrick, did you have any others you wanted to highlight before we move on to the final bit?
I didn't want to say anything about them really, but other games that I liked were Rayman 2 was another good platformer besides Mario, and it had actually I think had fog used in place. There was like a witch's cabin that you had to get to on a swampland. I think there was some fog there. Maybe that's just me recreating in my mind in a nice way, but yeah, I really liked Rayman more than most of the time, and I think Rayman's only really grown with popularity, especially with going back to the 2D of Origins. But I really liked those 3D platformers that they had. I thought that they controlled just as well or even better than Mario. I never really felt like I was like making a wrong decision when I wanted to go one way, go another, or something like that, which would be really hard to do with like 3D games and their cameras and all those issues that we encountered in like the worst platformers of the generation. But so there was that, and but a game that I played just about as much multiplayer as GoldenEye was a game that I actually owned, and friends would come over and play a lot. I'm not sure if it's really respected or not, but it's called Gauntlet Legends.
I don't know if it's respected, but I mean, like, no. They were successful back, in the arcade and the home versions for sure. I think they were really good adaptations basically of the concept.
Like But it's basically like Diablo, where you had to get a bunch of treasure, and then at the end of the level, I think you could use that treasure to buy upgrades or something like that for your character. It was, like a loot grind fest kind of thing where you looked around for little items and stuff like that to progress yourself. So I thought it was one of the first games to do that as well. I don't know. Maybe not, but you seem to know the skinny on it.
I mean, I played it in the arcade mostly, but you might be right. Like, as far as like home console, games. I mean, they had that port of Diablo for the PlayStation, but I feel like at that point in time there wasn't really much in that isometric kind of hack and slash arena for the console. So yeah, you might be right as far as it doing that kind of first in the console space.
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't research, though. That's just my memory.
The other thing, though, is those Rayman games you mentioned, those hold up remarkably well. That franchise, I think, is, personal opinion, I think is kind of timeless because it's just a good, solid platformer, and those just hold up.
And I think the art style is it always plays well to whatever console it's on. Like even the Game Boy Advance version of the original Rayman looks really nice. I think they always work well within their means in that series.
I never played the Game Boy Advance one, but yeah. So
I didn't really have anything to expand on.
Yeah.
Are you gonna play it?
Hey, did any of you guys end up playing Killer Instinct on the N64?
Yeah.
What'd you think of it? Because I got to tell you, I really liked it on the Super Nintendo. We had the cartridge. I played it a lot. We enjoyed it. My brother used to hate when I would get spinal and just wreck his face. It was fun.
Yeah, I was a huge Killer Instinct 1 fan in the arcade and the Super Nintendo. Killer Instinct 2, aka Gold, it didn't hit with me for some reason. I don't know if it's because I didn't like the new art. Like, I felt like the characters somehow looked like way plasticky, or way more plasticky than the first game. And I didn't really much care for the new characters. I don't know, it didn't really hold me the same way that the first game did. I was a bigger fan of Mortal Kombat Trilogy on the 64, because again, going back to your loading times thing, Angelo, like, It was nice to have a version of Mortal Kombat 3 where like Shang Tsung could do all of his morphs, where like the PlayStation version you had to like pick like 2 characters that he could morph into because that's all that they could load into the memory. So like, you would lose so much of that character. And so like on the 64 it's like, well, no, this is how he was meant to be played in the arcade, where he can morph into every single character, if you know the command.
Neat. I did not know that.
Also, for some reason, really dug Biofreaks, which was not a very good fighting game, but I actually had a lot of fun with it for a while. It was kind of like dark and dirty Power Stone before Power Stone was a thing.
Power Stone.
Is that the system where they had the Teenage Mutant Ninja fighting game too, or is that Sega?
That was Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that was Genesis and Super Nintendo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ninja Turtles were pretty much over by that point. Like, they went dormant for a long time.
Now they're back, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I see kids with the Ninja Turtle t-shirts
they look weirder.
They are weird.
Oh, and by the way, Angelo, just real quick to go back to last episode, I think that fourth Ninja Turtles movie in that set is the TMNT movie, which you should totally watch because it's excellent.
Cool. All right.
That's a very wonderful animated Ninja Turtles movie.
I like wonderful and animated. And Ninja Turtles.
Very the alien.
Yeah, it's got some aliens in there, but it's also the one with like the really excellent like arc between like Raphael and Leonardo where they're just not getting along. Period. Like really good dramatic stuff.
Neat.
Classic stuff.
Yeah. So
I'll check that out.
I guess we'll probably start to wrap up.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
I mean, I was kind of, before we went, I kind of wanted to just kind of talk about where we feel, and I guess we've touched on it a little bit, but kind of where in the spectrum of history, like both for just video games and Nintendo as a whole, the 64 sits in, because for my part, I really do feel like that era, and the Saturn, the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, while I have very fond memories of them, I almost feel like it's lost to time in the sense that I really can't go back very well. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but it's really difficult for me to go back and play those games.
It is hard, but I would kind of reiterate my point from before, which is that if you enjoy modern 3D games, thank Nintendo 64, because a lot of that came from their experimentation and their progress in, just 3D in general, like exploring it, navigating it, dealing with it, I guess.
Yeah, just hopefully we won't have to go back because we'll get more remakes like the 2 Zeldas that got remade for the 3DS, and other companies take notice that like it's going to sell like hotcakes and they're getting good reviews, and it doesn't seem like it's that hard to port. Maybe it is, but Nintendo is really slow, and they've already done it twice with Zelda.
Right.
I hope it does sell, honestly.
And I might be in the minority on this, but I feel that Mario 64, I mean, not only did it create the 3D platform, but I really feel that nothing has ever really eclipsed it, like, including other Mario games, because as much as I love the Galaxy games, there's something about the camera in Mario 64 that followed that character so well, and I never had problems, like, trying to figure out where he was at in relation to the environment, where I feel like in Galaxy I'm constantly fighting, like, the perspective as well as, like, get him jumping, like, not in the direction that I intend him to do so, and that never happened to me in Mario 64, and I feel like they haven't even been able to recreate the magic that game is.
Yeah, maybe there weren't as many walls or something, because like I'm thinking in Mario Sunshine when the buildings would get in the way, stuff like that. But you're right. I mean, I thought it was just because I spent way too much time with Mario 64 and became like one with that game. But I don't know.
No, because I mean, I bought a 64 off of a coworker like a few years ago, and of course the first thing I did was pop in Mario 64, and I was amazed at how good it still felt. And I was like, no, why don't other games feel like this now? Like, how did they break the mold the first time out? I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird. The thing too is my first real exposure to just like tearing that game apart. It's not that I hadn't played it before, but actually owning the game and playing the whole way through it was on the DS. And despite that being an inferior port of the game, it's really good and it was really fun. So it's one of those classic games that I think you got to play. I mean, I don't know how you would have missed it by this point if you're listening to this show, but if you have, at least go play Mario 64. So
yeah, and I think I mean I definitely agree with you, Patrick. Like I think it's time for like a 3DS port of that game, because even the DS version, I mean that was like DS launch era, so that's pretty old. You know, it's definitely time to update it.
Yeah, especially with the new multiplayer they added and stuff.
Oh man, just imagine like seeing that eel underwater in 3D.
Ooh.
It's one of my most terrifying video game moments.
Nothing compared to the garbage monster in Shadows of the Empire, though. Damn, that in the water.
Or the garbage monster in Banjo and Kazooie. It was like I think an underwater garbage, like it was like a fish type thing, but it was in like a garbage level, and I remember the water being yellow. I didn't like that.
Or the poo in Conquer. How did we not talk about Conquer?
Because no.
Okay, there you go. And we talked about Conquer.
The only thing that I'll say about Conquer, and maybe we'll talk about it in our April Fool's episode. But like when they announced Conquer 60, when they announced Conquer's Bad Fur Day, I was like, this is a hoax. There's no way Nintendo is letting this game on their machine.
It is a weird freaking game, dude.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually never played it. I've seen it, really? But I've never played it. I had no.
It's okay. I think it's 90%. Well, not 90% even is a bit high, but I think like 75% of it is just wow, this is actually happening. Okay, great, and you know it's a good game. It's an okay game. It's not a great game.
It is kind of like a nice little like time capsule because like all the movie references are like so of that time, like The Matrix and the Saving Private Ryan stuff, and like yep, this sure is a late '90s game.
But it's just like so much of it too is just like shock value. Like, oh look, that flower has boobs. Great, you know.
That boss is crap, literally.
Yep, that boss is the great mighty Pooh. That song is pretty good though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Like.
This is not how we should end the Nintendo 64 episode. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. Well, but I mean, I think like it's such a weird thing because there are so many like games that I think are just lost to time. Like that's not one that's going to come up in regular conversation very often. No. Like a lot of the games we talked about this episode, and rightfully so. I'm glad we talked about them, but it's stuff that nobody's going to remember. Like even a year from now, like they don't remember them now. And even
like Mischief Makers.
Yeah, I mean, Mischief Makers was a treasure game, and you know. And a well-made treasure game, but like hardly anybody bought it when it came out, and you know even fewer people I'm sure remember it now. But you know, and I feel like even like the standout games, other than like Mario 64 and Zelda, and then like you know GoldenEye for what it did for console first-person shooters, you know there's not a lot there that like really influenced you know a lot of game design going forward. But you know, but you can't really diminish the fact that. You know, they basically single-handedly created two of the biggest genres of video games, you know, in their two big franchises, just like one after the other. I mean, that's a huge, historic thing, and you can't take that away from Nintendo at all.
Right. And again, they rethought 3D essentially twice. Once for, you know, just action exploration in Mario 64, and then another time for the more whatever Zelda, you know, Zelda Ocarina of Time is, that is a totally different way to use it.
Right.
You know, so it's just, I don't know, like, it accomplished quite a bit.
Yeah. And
Star Fox 64 too, which we didn't mention either, but yeah, there was that.
I tend to not mention Star Fox just out of, like...
Because you don't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never got the Star Fox thing. I'm sorry.
I liked them. I liked Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64 Star Fox. I think those are the only two I liked, though.
I liked the idea of that one.
Star Fox Adventure?
Yeah. I liked the idea of Star Fox Adventures, but also that one, I think later on in the GameCube's life, which was, I think, Star Fox Assault, where it was kind of like a multiplayer game where it was almost like Battlefront, where, you could be on foot, but then there would be like guys in R-Wings and, like R-Wing tanks, you could get in and out of the vehicles and like, so you could be, like trying to shoot down an R-Wing from the ground and stuff like that. And that was pretty cool, but I never actually got around to playing it. I think I looked at it at E3 one year, but I didn't actually pick up the controller.
Yeah. I did get I do have that on my 3DS, and I think I've played it twice. So, it's not because I don't like the game, it's just, I played this before. Okay.
Well, from what I understand, the game is like 2 hours long, so...
Yeah. You
should probably just go ahead and knock that out. Yeah. And I think we've knocked out this podcast. What do you say, guys? Hopefully it was an interesting conversation. We didn't really have like a huge plan of action for this, but I think we brought up some fun and interesting and little talked about points on, a big piece of Nintendo 64 history. Oh, yeah, and we didn't really end up talking about, I guess I'll talk real quick, like just real briefly, like the thing that that was most important for me personally for the 64 was my turn away from Nintendo. And it really was. And again, you brought it up a couple times, Angelo, but it was Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. Like the fact that franchise went there, and it looked, and the fact that they just couldn't pull off that stuff on the Nintendo 64, where I was like, okay, well, the CD-ROM stuff is where it's at, and Nintendo 64 is pretty cool and all, but 90% of the games that I'm going to be interested in for the next 7 years are on the PlayStation. So
I'll mention this very briefly, but musically, the Nintendo 64 struggled a lot because of it didn't even have an actual sound chip on it. Like you had to actually steal from the processor to create sound channels in order to process sound. Which flip it over to PlayStation, and that had like Yellow Book and Red Book audio, which were just mind blowing. Like play Symphony of the Night and then play anything on Nintendo 64, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, play Symphony of the Night and then play Castlevania 64 and see what that does for you.
Pretty much.
Final Fantasy VII was also the game that caused me to buy a PlayStation 2, and I'm just glad that I waited that long so I could have all the PS1 games and PS2 games together. But that, coupled with the lack of titles at the end of the generation that I spoke about a little bit earlier, were really the two reasons that I left Nintendo until the very end of the GameCube generation when I got it really cheap and played the few games that I wanted to play on it. But it also probably robbed me of my childhood joy of playing games. Like, those...
Wow.
Well, it's not a bad thing. It's just like a different way of thinking about games that I got into. Like, once you start playing RPGs, you get hardcore. Like, and you can't help it, but like, you just start investing so much time into playing video games, it becomes a thing rather than like, this is like a joyous occasion and I don't do that much. And I kind of feel, I don't know, spiky prickles of happiness like all over my body because of like the vibrant colors and stuff that I'm not used to. It's like toward the end of the generation, I became used to it, expected more out of each game. And that's why I had to get a Final Fantasy VII or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's for me. That's kind of that was kind of the beginning of the end for me in Nintendo. Not that I'm not I still enjoy Nintendo games. I'm still what I would call a Nintendo fan. But as far as Nintendo being my primary gaming console of choice, that's where it ended. Because even the GameCube was like it was my backup system.
Right.
The Wii was my backup for my backup system, because I had all three that generation.
Yeah.
And again, now the Wii U is my backup for my PS4. So, that's kind of where Nintendo sits for me. And I think it sits for a lot of people like around our age. And it's simply because Nintendo is so excellent at making games. I mean, anybody can enjoy, but especially to capture the imaginations of, new generations of gamers that are first coming up. And, they're always reaching for that market. And as we get older, it's harder to, keep us as invested as the demographic that they're actually shooting for.
There is honestly nothing like a Nintendo game.
Right.
Like, there really isn't. They have their own stamp on their own product, and they're always, let me back that up. They are mostly very, very well polished, perfectly executed games. They don't typically feel pandering or like they just recycle old content. Again, I'm saying like typically. I'm hedging my words here because how many new Super Mario Brothers are there now? That's like the only thing that I could love from Nintendo that says like, oh, you guys are like going to the well a few too many times. But other than that, but you're going to have your other M's and you're going to have your weird, stuff that doesn't quite work. But even then, they did something like people say Majora's Mask didn't really work, but name another game like Majora's Mask. Seriously.
Right.
Good luck with that. And I think it's a pretty good Zelda game. I like it better than I like Ocarina of Time, honestly. We didn't really talk about that one. We're not going to because we're probably out of time.
Well, but and just real quick, to end it on a real positive note, like, and this is still true today, but especially back then, like, Nintendo makes excellent hardware. Mm-hmm. So, and I will tell you right now, go buy yourself a Nintendo 64 from 1996 on eBay, and then on the same day buy yourself a PlayStation 1 from 1996 and see which one works.
Right? How much longer? One left. This Wii we have here is forever old, and I'm on my third Xbox 360.
Exactly. Yeah, same here.
So, yeah.
So, and I guess that's, what we've got to say about the N64. So, as always, thank you for listening. Really trying to grow the show lately. We're making some strides. We have some big stuff lined up, trying to get some special guests and some bigger topics. So tell your friends. We're really trying to upgrade the apparatus. Like I said, this is the plan for this year. Both Angelo and Patrick have been really proactive about trying to get some new blood on the show. I'm doing my part as well. So, I'm going to put the call out. I don't do it very often, but, if you liked this episode, would really appreciate it if you could go to iTunes and rate and review. That does help us get noticed and helps the show grow. And like I said, let your friends know. Maybe, tweet the link once in a while. And, if we talk about something that interests you, talk about it to other people. You can always join the conversation at pixelbit.com. And also follow us on Twitter. You can find Patrick at...
Some boss.
Thank you, Patrick. Angelo?
I'm at A Roguish Ham.
And you can find me at Julian_Titus. And Angelo did make a good point that it's kind of going to be difficult for me to find excellent music for this episode, but I am going to end this one with the funkiest beat that's ever been known to man when it comes to video games, and that is, of course, the intro to Buck Bumble. So enjoy that, and as always, keep it pantsless, Internet.
Oh, yeah.
Goodbye.
What about now? It's time to rock with the big
Seriously, that Buck Bumble, though.
What about now? It's time to rock with the big Buck Bumble. Bump to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bump to the bump to the bumble. Bump to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bump to the bump to the bumble. Bump to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bump to the bump to the bumble. Bump to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bump to the bump to the bumble. Bump to the boot to the boot to the boot boot. Bump to the bass to the bass bass. Bump to the boot to the boot to the boot. Bump to the bass to the bass bass.
Oh yeah, I forgot to ask you about CM Punk, who's back now. I was going to get autographs about, and you didn't want him, but like now he's back. What do you feel like?
Oh, I think I would want to meet him, but, just getting his autograph, like, secondhand, I could just do that on eBay.
Well, he showed up on Royal Rumble, though, right?
No. Mm-mm. No, he wasn't there.
What?
No.
I saw a picture of him.
Oh, no, people were like, tweeting out this picture of him, like, with, like, it was like a meme, him saying, like, I told you, fuckers. Because, like, he'd been talking about all, like, how terrible, like, the WWE had gotten in, like, the creative realm, and then, like, the Royal Rumble was, like, the worst Royal Rumble in years.
How is that? Explain this to me, because as someone who's not into wrestling, I don't understand anything about why this Royal Rumble was bad.
Okay, so, if you know wrestling and you're what's known as a smart mark like me, who, like, I know behind the scenes stuff. Like I understand like the business model of it and everything.
Right.
You kind of know that it's going to be like one of a handful of guys that wins this thing because they're not going to like, because the winner of the Royal Rumble gets the main event WrestleMania. So you're not going to have like, you know, Kofi Kingston, who's like a, you know, like
C tier.
He's like lower mid card,
okay,
you know, type of guy. You're not going to have him win the Royal Rumble because like there's no point. So you know it's going to be like a handful of guys, right? And the thing is that you're always wondering, like when they have somebody win or lose, it's like, well, you want to know who benefits, because ideally you want to make like the loser look pretty cool and strong, but then the winner look even stronger because like he took over like this really tough guy. Like you don't want it to be like a one-sided thing. So there's a few guys that are like really popular with the fans. There's Daniel Bryan, who he's like the little engine that could. Like the company has kept him down for years, but the fans love him so much that he ended up becoming the champion last year.
Nice.
So he was injured for like 9 months and he just came back, and they were like, oh, well, Daniel Bryan is probably going to like win the Royal Rumble and then main event WrestleMania because like Brock Lesnar is the champion, so it'll be like this David versus Goliath story, like perfect storytelling. You know, that would be amazing. He gets eliminated in like less than 10 minutes.
Oof.
Like it was like he got thrown out and like the whole audience was like, what just happened? And they started booing. Because it was like, holy, like, it wasn't just that he got eliminated, but it was like he got eliminated so freaking early. Like, he was barely in the match.
You think he might have been still injured?
I'm sorry?
You think he might have still been injured, but he wanted to come back so much they were just like, all right, we'll put you in for a second here, but we can't risk it?
Yeah, I don't know if it was that, or if, you know, like at the last minute they're like, no, we're going to go a different way, or what. Like, I don't know if it was just like his chance to get back into a big pay-per-view, but then he was like not quite ready for prime time. You know, I think if that was the case, they probably should have put him in later, because I think he was like number 8 or 9 out of 30. And so then he got eliminated like, you know, just a few guys after that. And it's like, well, if they were worried about him, you know, not being able to like go for like, you know, 40 minutes or whatever, like they should have put him in at like 25. And then at least he would have been in with like the final dudes, because the final 5 is always like, you know, those are like the top of the top, right? Mm-hmm. So there was that thing. Then there's Bray Wyatt, who's like a very charismatic character that people love, but it's clear that like the writers don't know what to do with him because he's just so strange, right? He comes out first or second, and he just wrecks house for the longest time. He's just doing so amazing, and then he gets kicked out. It's like, oh well, and I think he got thrown out by like somebody. It was like weird, like whoever he got like thrown out by. It was like really strange. It's like, okay, well, I thought they were going to push him, but they didn't, right? And so then there's Dean Ambrose, who's a really fan favorite, and there's Dolph Ziggler, who's to me, he's like the guy that should be on top, but he keeps getting like so close to the championship, and then he just doesn't get it, you know. Mm-hmm. And he was the last person he was number 30, and he got eliminated almost immediately. And it was like, what? Mm-hmm. Like, why did you? What does that serve? Like, it just makes him look so lame at that point. People love him so much. He gets a huge pop from the crowd. So the thing is that
all the heroes went down real quick.
A lot of the heroes went down real quick, and then, but the thing is that, you know, a lot of people were thinking that Roman Reigns, who's like a really, you know, they've been pushing him really hard to be the man, right? And so people had kind of expected him to either be, you know, the winner or close to the winner, but you still don't know, because it could go a lot of different ways. So the thing is that when Daniel Bryan got eliminated like super quick, it was like, oh, well, it's Roman Reigns then. And it's like, so when Roman Reigns came out, and this is a guy that literally just like 3 months ago, everybody was like cheering for and like standing up in their seats when he would come out. His music hits, and it's just wall-to-wall boos.
Now, but they were booing the show, not necessarily him?
No, they were booing him.
Oh boy.
And it was like, so he comes out, and then so after the boos settle down, all you hear is, Daniel Bryan! Mm-hmm. Daniel Bryan! And it's like, you know, so he's in there, and like he fights the last guys off, and you know, like like there was a little bit of hope because like Dean Ambrose was still in there and people love him, but then he got eliminated, and then that's when people just lost. They're like, well, he's definitely winning now. So,
Right.
So who were the bad people that were still in?
It was a Big Show and Kane. Like nobody cares.
Oh, I thought Big Show was a big deal. Sorry.
Well, no, he is, but he was a big deal in 1999. So,
okay. That's how I know the name then.
Yeah, it's like he's way over. He's ready to retire soon. Same thing for Kane.
Same thing with the Undertaker. For goodness sake, was he around?
No. I don't even know if the Undertaker's going to be at WrestleMania this year. He might be done.
All right.
But yeah. So
he's been there forever.
Yeah. So yeah, and so it was just like the thing is that like in one moment when Daniel Bryan got kicked out, it's like, well, not only do we know who's going to win now, but we also really hate who's winning because, at least it could have been like Daniel Bryan versus Roman Reigns at the end, and then maybe Roman Reigns like throws him out in some sort of like controversial way or something. So then you've also got like an angle for later on. But no, it was just whatever.
Royal Rumble.
And they had to do like damage control the next day. Like they had an interview with Roman Reigns and they were asking him like, well, the fans seem to think that, you're just being handed everything and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, Are they really doing Roman Reigns damage control? Because everybody turned on him in an instant? I'm sorry, that was a really long aside, but it's really fascinating when you kind of know the ins and outs of stuff. And I was watching it with John and some other friends, and so when Daniel Bryan got eliminated, John was just like, "Who benefits from that? What does that like? Where do you even go from there? Like." We know what's going to happen now. Like, there's, like, and you can feel it. Like, all of the interest in that match completely went out of the room.
All the energy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm recording this. If you want to throw it in the show, I think it's worth. I think people might be into it because we do talk wrestling on here.
I might. I have it recorded too, so I might throw it in at the end, depending on how long the show is.
Maybe we could save it for the next one because I don't know when you put it in.
Well, the next one is going to be a pretty heady one, so I don't think it would fit there. But I might.
Hopefully.
I might put a note in that says like, well, if you want to hang around after the song, you can listen to me rant about Royal Rumble for a bit.
Oh yeah.
There's gonna be people. You know what though? The wrestling fans will do that because everybody's talking about it. I mean, people that I don't. It was like the Super Bowl. In that people that don't even know football, like got some stuff from the Super Bowl. They got that it was a really big game and that it was really close and that. There were some really bad plays that happened, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, there's some girls who were like, I actually might like football.
Yeah, I mean, wrestling-wise, like, it's like Royal Rumble and WrestleMania are the two things where it's like, even if you don't watch wrestling, you might end up, like, at a Royal Rumble or WrestleMania party,
Right.
Because, I mean, there were definitely some people at this party that didn't watch wrestling, or they watched it, like, years ago, but they still seem to have a pretty good time. Because, I was like, I'm going to just let you know, I'm a wrestling fan, but I also think it's stupid. Like, I'll be making fun of it along with you. Like, don't worry.
But it's stupid in the best way.
Yeah. And when you get like a really excellent match or you see something that you've never seen before, I mean, like, that can be really amazing. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit on Consumption Junction next episode because me and John, by that point we will have gone to our second Inspire Pro Wrestling show, which is a local awesome promotion, and it's so much fun.
Is it anything like the Hood Slam stories that I've heard from a certain other podcast?
No, because it's more of a PG-13 show.
Okay.
The Hood Slam thing sounds like it's, quasi illegal.
It does, doesn't it?